Hi everyone, Helen Blunden here. Hope you're happy, healthy and well. It's time for a new book review today where I share some life lessons. Today I'm going to talk about Yellowface by Rebecca F. Kuang. Now you may have seen this book because it's out in the bookstores and in libraries. This indeed is a library book and I have to return it very quickly because there's a long list of people behind me who are waiting to read this book. Yellowface is quite a popular book. I've not read any of Rebecca F. Kuang's previous books. You may have, and if you have, let me know what they're like because they would be intriguing. I read this book in a couple of sittings. I could not put it down. It was quite an eye-opener into the publishing industry and what happens when it comes to how books are published out there. It's written in a very tongue-in-cheek satire way, although the protagonist, who in this case is June Hayward, who is a white lady, young lady, who is a friend of Athena Liu, who's an up-and-coming, very talented young Asian author, but I guess not really likable. Young Athena dies, she chokes quite early on in the piece, and what June does is she steals Athena's manuscript, rejigs it around, publishes it and becomes famous. Most of the book is all about June trying to grapple with holding onto this secret, which becomes worse and worse, which she has to fight the social media, the trolls and all those bad toxic people online who start to put one and one together and realize that she may have stolen the manuscript. It is an enthralling read, but through this, rather than me speak about what this book is about, because you can pick it up and I can guarantee you'll get immersed into it straight away. There's a lot of different themes here around cultural misappropriation, storytelling, whose story is it for you to tell, and also around social media toxicity, plus what goes on in the publishing industry, although I would hazard to guess that it's not just the publishing industry, it is, well, LinkedIn for one is entirely that ilk, if anyone is on LinkedIn. What I like to pick out here is I've written some notes because I like when I read a book to actually pick out certain elements that I can then discuss and debate and kind of pontificate about how it meets with my worldview and then share them here, knowing full well that it is only my opinion, but it is something that I guess I'm trying to make sense of. The very first lesson that Rebecca F. Kuang made through June Hayward is she writes that, do we come to our books with prejudice? It's a really interesting question. So I'll put it to you. When you look at a book, do you look at the author and then you have certain expectations of the author? So if you pick up a book and you see a male name, how do you approach that book versus if you see a female name or if you see a name that is abbreviated or a pseudonym? Do you have certain expectations? So it's an interesting question because it made me think of how I approach my books. I'm a bit of I just like to read anything and everything, and I must admit I do prefer a variety of books from different authors. If I see a long name or if I see a different non-Anglo-Saxon name, it's much more intriguing for me because I assume that I'm not going to get a story along a typical storyline that I usually get. And also knowing that the story would be of a different time and a different place and of a different country, which will then put me in a different world. So in some way, yes, that might be an answer. I do approach it differently, thinking that if I see a name on a book, that the expectation is that I get a different world. But what happens if that doesn't happen? And I say this simply because just because you might have a different name, and I could say it from my point of view, my maiden name is a very long Greek name. If I see a long Greek name, is the expectation that I'm going to get a story about Greece? I'd hope not. I'd hope not. Because it doesn't matter where you come from. Ultimately, the authors can write about anything they want. Just because they've got a Chinese name, does that make it that they have to write about Chinese stuff? No. The second one was this question of, is it an old-fashioned idea to expect good, strong writing skills and the craft of writing, especially in the world of what marketing and promotions are nowadays? Because she also wrote in here, and I quote, bestsellers are chosen, unquote. And it made me think about the question I had wandering around bookstores, thinking, why does one book sell more copies than another book that is probably much more well written, or much more evocative, or much more thought-provoking, or is a better book, versus another one on the bookshelves that has a huge marketing engine behind it, promoting them on their huge social networks, have quotes on their book covers by other well-known authors. Why is it that some authors seem to get much more promotion than others? This idea that she said it's an old fashion of good storytelling and good writing techniques. And I thought to myself, geez, I hope not. I hope we haven't gone down that track, that we are all now just following trends and following what everyone else is writing and following what everyone else is reading. I personally think that I love a good story. I love how if it's written in such a way that is beautiful, that is evocative, that is thought-provoking, that immerses you immediately. I like good writing. It would be awful to think that as a society we're now just chasing the dollar, and we're now just chasing the most popular books, or the books that might come from just diverse writers simply because it is trendy. I'd hope that we're, as a society, that we're a lot better than that. But this book made me rethink, maybe we're not. But it is satire, so maybe we are. I don't know. The other one is, it struck a chord with me. She said older women have this thing about capitalization, how older women capitalize their sentences. And I thought to myself, that's not right. That's not true. That's a bit of a generalization, isn't it? And I thought to myself, when I write and I want to make an impact, of course I'll capitalize some letters in the context of, if you write a full stop, afterwards comes a capital letter. It's how I was taught grammar. But this idea that older women have this capitalization, I guess if we're using generalizations, we could say, well, why do younger people all write everything in lowercase? I didn't understand that. Ultimately though, the big things about this book that really hit me was the two parts. The first one was the toxicity of social media. And in particular, with that aspect of it, was in two parts. The first part is how much time June Hayward, who is a writer, spent time surfing social media sites, surfing Instagram and Twitter, to try and make sense of all the trolls and what they were saying, and then also creating different social media sites to go back and fight against them. I thought to myself, social media is also not just toxic for the people online who berate you online, but also toxic for the creators out there who should spend more time on their craft and not worry about what other people think, and not worry about honing and creating a perfect online social media profile to then try and push and promote their books to their communities or to their readers. And so this idea of this social media toxicity was in two parts for me. Not only the trolls and feeding the trolls, was this second part of, as an author and as someone who is an expert in your field, even not just the publishing industry and in other different industry, there is this expectation that you build an online profile for the intention then of promoting and selling yourself, selling your work, selling what you're doing to a group out there. I'm not going to even call it a community, not even a network, just trying to find readers who then would become consumers. So this idea where the expert, the author, the writer is then responsible for their own promoting and marketing on their highly curated social media profile doesn't really sit well with me. I would much prefer the writer that I follow would be the writer that I find, the writer that I will go searching and looking for and see where they're at, as opposed to them pushing, promoting their stuff at me. But of course I might be in the minority. So for me, the social media toxicity came in two parts. Yes, there is the toxicity of the spammers, but also this idea that nowadays the publishing industry also wants authors to be their own marketing and promotion engines, and that if you don't build a following, therefore somehow you might not be supported or promoted or helped by the publishing industry simply because you can't help yourself. For me, I would much prefer to spend that time honing my craft, writing good stories, reading good stories, wait for people to find me. But again, that's why I probably didn't make it as a writer. The second big theme in this book for me was this idea of the cultural misappropriation. Whose story is it to tell? Was it June's story to tell Athena's and to promote Athena's book under her name, even though she wasn't Asian? Some people out there might have an opinion for that. And the way I approached this was actually put it into my own context. This is how I think. The idea of the cultural misappropriation in this book was it right for June, who is a white woman, to share a story of Chinese voices? And I thought to myself, I can't speak for that because I'm not Asian. Okay, let's change it. I come from a Greek background and I have heard stories of my parents and my grandparents going through, and also great-grandparents, going through very, very difficult times and conditions and situations in the past, through civil wars, through world wars and so forth. Is it up to me is it more correct if I wrote their story? And given that I come from a Greek background, and given that my maiden name, if I was to promote it with my maiden name, does that make it more, I guess, realistic and more correct simply because I have a connection to that culture? And I would say no. And the reason is, it would be that it might make some relevance, but not always. If there is an author out there who does not come from my cultural background, but who has studied the language, who has studied the culture, studied the traditions, maybe lived in Greece, maybe knows the language, has researched quite heavily and spoken to across all different voices of people of Greek-speaking background to research the book, and then writes a story from that point of view, I don't care whether they don't come from a Greek background. What they've done is they've actually shared a story by gleaning the research from a wide pool. And so I would approach it from the sense that as a reader, it would be up to me to do my homework also and look into this author and see what kind of research they've done and make a decision as to whether I'm going to read them or not. What's to say just because I have a Greek background, do I have the most correct voice in sharing a Greek story? I don't think I have. I'll have one perspective of it. I might not have an entire view. I wouldn't dispel an author who has researched and have spoken widely to other people and who might have an academic or a professional career in it, might even know the language, might know Greek more than I do. I mean, just in the previous video, I said it was the first time I'd read a Greek play. Does that make me, just because I'm Greek, doesn't necessarily mean I'll understand it all. So that's my idea. I just think that just because an author doesn't come from that cultural background, I'm not going to dispel them. I'm not going to say I'm not going to read them. I think it is just up to me to really look into how the author has approached this work and their research, and then make a decision as to whether I'm going to read them or not. And I'd like to say that I would like to read them and then open a conversation with others who might be of that background or not and share those perspectives, but I'm not going to diss on them like people did in this book. That is all that I'd like to share for Rebecca F. Kuang's Yellowface. It is a highly recommended book with very strong themes. It is a satire. I'm going to say that I didn't like the characters in this book at all. Everyone was just contemptible. I thought they were just spoiled young brats. It had me interested enough because there were certain lessons that I had picked out that made me think about how I approach books and how I approach this idea of this cultural misappropriation. I personally think it is just up to the reader to make that choice as to whether they're going to read that person. An author is an author because they can write and they have every right to write what they want to write, but it's up to the readers to then decide and discern whether they want to read it or not. Okay then, thanks for listening, thanks for watching, bye for now.